When my mother died, she left behind a small but exquisite collection of jewelry. Heirlooms that had been passed down through generations, each piece holding a story, a memory, a fragment of her life. I had expected grief, of course. I had not expected betrayal. My cousin Lauren took them. Not out of need, never out of necessity, but for attention. She posted photos online, praising her own generosity, claiming she had donated the jewelry to charity. Likes and shares poured in. Comments praised her as kind, thoughtful, selfless. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Each piece of my mother's history turned into content for social media, each memory stripped away and displayed as a trophy for Lauren's personal glory. I felt rage, sharp and consuming. But I also felt something else. Clarity. I wouldn't confront her directly, not yet. I would reclaim what was mine. I would track down every piece, every memory, and return them not just to their rightful place, but to honor my mother. The charity she donated to was reputable, small but well-known, with programs that relied heavily on volunteers. And that's where I decided to insert myself. I signed up, offering my time, my attention, my skill. It wasn't enough to watch from the outside. I needed access. I needed eyes on the inventory. I needed to know where each item went, who received it, and how it could be recovered. The first few days were routine. I sorted donations, assisted with paperwork, and familiarized myself with the organization's processes. I observed quietly, noting the logistics, the cataloging system, the ways donations moved from intake to distribution. And then I saw it. A necklace. A small, delicate gold chain with a tiny sapphire pendant. My mother's. Tagged with a recipient's name, already scheduled to be delivered to a gala event for donors. I felt my pulse quicken. I didn't snatch it. I didn't rush. I recorded every detail, the tag, the location, the schedule, and began forming a plan. One piece at a time, one careful move at a time. I began mapping the flow of jewelry, tracing each donation, each recipient, each event. Lauren had assumed her act would vanish into applause online, unchallenged. She had no idea I was already moving in silence, like a shadow, preparing to dismantle her self-congratulatory narrative, piece by piece. By the end of my first week, I had identified 3 more items: a ruby ring, my mother's pearl earrings, and a diamond-studded brooch. Each had been logged and cataloged, each intended for a different gala or auction. I smiled quietly to myself. It was going to take time, patience, precision, and I had both. By the second week at the charity, I had settled into a rhythm. The other volunteers were friendly but distracted, absorbed in the thrill of helping others and the recognition they received from small acts of service. I moved like a shadow among them, unseen, unnoticed, quietly collecting information. Each piece of jewelry had its own path, each donor or recipient its own schedule. I kept meticulous notes, handwritten lists, digital spreadsheets, mental maps. I learned who handled what, how the items were stored, which events had the highest foot traffic. Everything. Lauren had assumed her theft would disappear into applause, but she underestimated me. She had no idea I was systematically reclaiming the legacy she had stolen. I began small. The sapphire necklace, scheduled for a gala auction, was my first target. I didn't steal it outright. I simply introduced a subtle delay, a minor paperwork discrepancy, a note in the system that a donor confirmation was missing, enough to hold the piece without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, Lauren posted another photo online, feeling so proud to give back. My mom would be proud too. Charity giving back. I felt a cold thrill. Each post was proof that she was oblivious to my silent intervention, proof that I was closer to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Over the next weeks, I repeated the process with the other items. The pearl earrings, meant for a children's hospital fundraiser, were redirected to a secure storage room I had suggested to the charity manager for organization purposes. The diamond brooch, originally intended for a donor gala, was set aside under pretext of an inventory check. I watched Lauren, always posting, always seeking praise. Her comments about generosity and family pride stung, but they also fueled my determination. Each like, each share, was a reminder that I was correcting the narrative she had falsely crafted. I didn't stop there. I learned the routines of the volunteers. The ones who handled high-value items were predictable, distracted, overconfident in their systems. I subtly influenced their schedules, volunteered for shifts they overlooked, offered to help with tasks they dismissed, took on responsibilities no one else wanted. Each small act was a cover, a way to access and reclaim the jewelry without arousing suspicion. By the end of the month, I had a mental map of every piece of jewelry Lauren had donated. I knew where it was, how it moved, and the exact moment I could recover each one. The emotional aspect was just as important. Each piece I reclaimed was more than metal and gems. It was a memory, a fragment of my mother's story. When I finally held the sapphire necklace in my hand, carefully wrapped in tissue, I could almost hear her voice, gentle, precise, affectionate. The ruby ring, the pearl earrings, the brooch, they all carried echoes of her life, her love, and the legacy Lauren had tried to erase. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. I orchestrated each return like a symphony, deliberate, calculated, and meaningful. And then came the day Lauren herself showed up at the charity, wearing a smile and ready for another photo op. "I can't believe how much attention this jewelry is getting," she said aloud, holding a bracelet for the camera. "People really notice generosity when it's visible, don't they?" I didn't respond. I simply watched. Every smile, every self-congratulatory post made my reclamation sweeter, because she would soon learn that generosity without honesty is hollow, and that no amount of applause can erase the truth. The first piece I returned wasn't flashy, but it mattered. The sapphire necklace, once meant for a gala auction, now rested in my hands, carefully cleaned and polished. I didn't simply take it home. I returned it to my mother's memory in a way that mattered. I arranged a private exhibition at the local historical society, a quiet display highlighting family heirlooms, their history, and their stories. I labeled the necklace with a small, respectful note about its origin, emphasizing the lineage, the love, the memories it carried. No one else needed to know the circumstances of its return. The ruby ring followed. It had been destined for a fundraising raffle, but I intercepted it weeks before the event. I placed it in a secure box, accompanied by my mother's letters and photographs, and presented it to my closest relatives. Each reaction was careful, thoughtful, filled with gratitude. No one could dispute the authenticity, the care, the significance of what I had done. Lauren began to notice. She called the charity repeatedly, asking where certain items had gone. Her tone was polite but strained, tinged with confusion and growing suspicion. "I don't understand," she said during one call. "This piece was scheduled for the donor gala. How is it missing?" I listened, silent, calm. I had no role in the call. The system had shifted, and her plans were crumbling under the weight of her own carelessness. She couldn't understand that her own performance of generosity had been undone, not by theft, but by truth and careful planning. Each piece became a small victory. The pearl earrings went to a local museum's display on family heritage, a gesture that preserved their history. The diamond brooch, once meant for an online charity auction, was placed in a secure private collection, accompanied by a detailed story of my mother's life and its meaning. I documented everything meticulously. Each piece returned carried not just the jewelry, but a reclamation of memory, a statement that my mother's legacy would not be obscured, even by someone who sought attention and praise at her expense. Lauren grew frantic. She sent messages directly to me, subtly accusing me of overstepping, of monopolizing her charitable acts. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded in one email. "These donations were supposed to honor Mom." I replied simply, "These are not donations to be flaunted. They are memory, history, and love. I am preserving what should never have been taken for personal gain." Her silence was telling. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. At a volunteer event, Lauren tried to charm her way back into attention, posting photos and talking loudly about the donations she had made in our mother's honor. I walked up calm, measured. "You mean the items you stole for likes and praise?" I asked softly. "They're no longer in your control. Her face fell. The audience of volunteers watched in confusion, unsure of what had transpired between us. But I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Every returned piece spoke louder than words ever could. By the end of the week, every single piece of my mother's jewelry had been reclaimed. Each return was deliberate, respectful, and meaningful. My mother's legacy was intact. Lauren's attempts at spectacle had been undone not with anger, but with careful strategy, planning, and persistence. I had transformed her hollow performance into a testament of truth, memory, and love, and in the process, I had reclaimed more than jewelry. I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, and the fragments of my mother's story that she had tried to rewrite.
This was the necklace Lauren had shown off online. The one she claimed was a donation in Mom's honor. It had been meant for a gala, photographed, praised, and forgotten. I held it in my hands. The weight of years, the stolen memories, and the legacy almost erased pressed against me. I didn't feel anger, I felt purpose. I returned it quietly. Not to a museum, not to a display, not to her. I placed it alongside my mother's letters, photographs, and keepsakes in a small community center exhibit. Only those who truly knew her were invited. People came, paused, whispered, read the captions. Each piece told a story. My mother's story. Lauren's theft was erased by truth. She never confronted me again. There were posts, vague comments, but nothing about the jewelry. Her performance of generosity had vanished. I didn't want revenge for spectacle. I wanted restoration. Every piece I returned became a gift, not just to my mother, but to memory itself. Each story was preserved, each legacy reclaimed. I continued volunteering at the charity. I guided others, ensured donations were genuine, and quietly protected meaningful contributions. The jewelry became symbols of love, history, and care. Late at night, I would sit by the display. I imagined my mother smiling. I had restored her story, honored her life, and reclaimed a piece of myself. The theft had started a journey, not for revenge, but for memory, truth, and justice. And finally, in the quiet, I felt peace.